Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a review video, and that is for the book that was the October pick for the Book Naturalist Book Club, Darwin Comes to Town, How the Urban Jungle Drives Evolution by Menno Schilthuizen. And Menno Schilthuizen is a senior research scientist in the Netherlands and a professor of evolutionary biology at Leiden University. And so this book really talks about evolution and adaptation of animals and plants in urban environments. And I think this is an excellent book. It's very readable. It takes a complicated subject, evolution, and he writes it in a way that really is accessible to the general audience. I found it very lively, very engaging, very interesting. I wanted to keep reading. I found it a quick read, and I thought he lays out his premise really, really well. So in this book, he is arguing that there are species that have been exhibiting evolution in real time as they adapt and overcome barriers to living in human-built environments. And so he basically has three sections in this book. The first section is how species have adapted and evolved due to physical and chemical structures within urban-built environments. And the second is how evolution is occurring due to these species' interactions with other plants, other animals, and also humans. And then lastly, he talks about species that have evolved due to sexual selection, because animals are sexually selecting their mates due to different parameters when they're in urban environments versus when they're in rural environments. And he gives lots of examples of different plants and animals for each of these categories. And those anecdotes and those stories are what makes this book so special, I think. So for instance, and I talked about this you will hear this in my vlog, but I want to share it again just because I think it's such a excellent image of how animals and plants and other living creatures are interacting with what humans have built. So he's talking about animals that are being like specimens, dead specimens that have been collected and put on display or put into storage in this museum for researchers' purposes to go back if they need to look at things about the particular animal. And there's a collection in this museum of dead hedgehogs. And he says, the McFlurry hedgehog, for example, is a hedgehog that met its demise when its head got stuck in the hole in the top of a plastic McFlurry soft serve ice cream cup and is mounted in precisely that undignified position. It is just one of many similar hedgehog victims of this popular fast food dessert. As the accompanying card explains, searching for leftover ice cream, the hedgehogs would get their heads in through the wide opening in the lids, but their spines stopped them from pulling out again. They would die from starvation or blindly walk into water and drown. So that very specific and also small example of how human-built things cause the demise of animals, and things that you wouldn't even think of, right? Like the McFlurry cup. Like, who would think that an animal would stick their head in the hole? But of course they would, getting at that awesome ice cream. And that goes along, and later on in the book he talks about, this is a classic example of birds learning to exploit resources that humans have made available to them. So the classic example is of birds that learned how to poke a hole in the top of the milk jug that was left on people's doorsteps back when milk was delivered by hand in Great Britain. And they would poke a hole in the top of the milk jug and drink the cream that was on the top. And they would do this within minutes of the milkman delivering the bottle. And they very clearly had adapted to this phenomenon of these bottles of milk showing up on a doorstep. Like, they had no reason to understand what was going on there, but they knew enough that that was a very rich source of food that they could exploit. And they were smart enough to, no matter how humans tried to stop them from drinking the cream out of the top of the bottle, they were able to penetrate whatever barriers humans put in their way. And so I think that is sort of like the perspective that this book brings, is animals will, or species, living species, because he talks about plants too, how plants have evolved to cohabitate with the human-built environment. That there's so much amazing about that process, that it's so clever what animals will do, and it's also just mind-boggling how species can adapt and overcome. However, the author is not saying that this is what's going to happen with every species, right? Like, he very clearly, especially at the end in his summary of the book, specifically talks about how not every species is going to be able to adapt and evolve quickly enough to overcome the barriers that humans place on them, in destruction of habitat, in creation of new urban built habitat. Like, the majority of species are not going to be able to overcome how quickly things are changing. And so we shouldn't be fooled by the examples that are shown in this book of species that have been able to evolve and to adapt and evolve, into thinking that all species will be able to. That's clearly not the case. He also very specifically says, in a lot of cases, some of these adaptations look like evolution, but we aren't for sure that they are in fact endpoints of evolution, right? Like, because the final determination of whether a species has evolved or not to be different from their ancestors is if their genes are different enough. And so not every species that he talks about in this book have they been able to determine if the genes of one species has evolved enough from its original ancestral species to really call them two different species, right? So, he makes that clear as well. So while these are very interesting and compelling examples of how evolution is occurring in urban environments, he wants to be cautious in saying, that evolution is done its work, and this is the end point for these species, because this is all still in flux and is still happening. The adaptations and the changes are still ongoing. So I really love this book. I thought it was a really fun read, really engaging and interesting. I hope if you haven't had a chance yet to pick it up, you will pick it up. This is Darwin Comes to Town by Menno Schilthuizen. Very good entry into our Book Naturalist Book Club selections. So for the month of November, we will be reading The Seed Keeper by, I believe, Diane Wilson. And I'm very excited about that one. It's an Indigenous author. And so I think that will be fabulous for Indigathon, and look forward to talking with you about that at the end of November. Hope everyone is doing well and finding some good books to read. I'll talk to you later.